Apartment dwellers of Reddit. What secrets have you learned about your neighbors through your paper-thin walls? That my neighbor's husband was beating her, like straight up beating her. They had a 2-year-old at the time, and I knew she was a stay-at-home mom. So one day I had a weekday off work. I went over with a cake and made her my best friend. At the time, she had a broken arm and 2 huge black eyes. She didn't have any friends as she wasn't from the area. I helped her with her kid, I helped her dump him, and I helped her move back to her home province, and we're still best friends to this day. We now have a Discord. Check out the server in the link in the description. Story 2. When I was younger, I moved into this new apartment complex. First night there, it started. Banging noises. Every night around 11 p.m. I hear this couple banging loudly. I admit that I found it a bit entertaining because it never went on for too long, until a couple weeks later. I see the guy walking out of his apartment, 75 years old and quite husky. Nobody was banging. I was listening to his adult content over surround sound. Story 3. My Chinese neighbor sings to someone through the phone about 3 nights a week. I don't know what he's saying, but it sounds like he really loves whoever it is he's singing to. I don't really get annoyed by it because I think it's a pretty sweet thing to do. It's to the point now that if I don't hear singing for a while, I get a little worried about him. Story 4. My neighbor is the perfect neighbor. Single guy in his 40s. He makes no noise and is rarely home. I see him leaving sometimes in the morning, always in a suit and tie, hair perfectly combed, and he drives an M6. But one weekend each month, his 2 sons come to visit him. They're both pretty young, and the week before they come, I've heard him talking on the balcony with someone on the phone about the plans he's made to do with his boys once they're there. Also, once they're at his apartment, I can hear him read to them every night before bed. I totally thought this was going to be the sons are a big problem or something like that. No, it's just sweet all the way through. Story 5. Lived in a 4-apartment strip back in the 90s. Quiet, peaceful, perfect. One Saturday afternoon, I'm sitting on the couch watching TV and I hear a gunshot. Second later, another. I run next door and pound on the door, can't get in. So I call 911. Tell them this and the cops show up pretty quick. Turns out the elderly couple next door did a murder self-unalive pact. Story 6. I learned that my old neighbor's kid is an adventurer in the body of a 9-year-old. The first conversation I ever heard between mother and son was something akin to her shrieking, "What are you doing to the carpet?" "I'm digging a hole, Mom." I often heard her crying and one time asking him if he'd prefer to live with his dad because he seemed miserable with her. She thought that was why he was acting out. He ended up crying too and begging her to let him stay. So he did, and at least they seemed to get on better after that. To not end on a sour note, the funniest thing I heard her shrieking was, "Oh my God, where did your clothes go?" "Not here." "What are you doing?" "I'm free, Mom, I'm free." She scolded him, but after I heard him stomp off, I heard her laughing pretty hard on the other side of the wall. Story 7. My next-door neighbor used to constantly break up with her boyfriend and have loud, sobbing phone calls with her friends late at night. One time, a friend even called the police because he was worried that she would unalive herself. I saw the police walking down the hall as I was coming home, and they thought I was her at first. Then they went into her apartment and spoke for 30 minutes about love, pills, and the importance of staying resilient in the face of breakups. The officer was a great guy, but I heard way too much. Story 8. The woman next door has a relationship with her cat that is interesting. She's a recluse in her mid-40s, nothing wrong with that, but she doesn't seem to be handling it all that well. She treats it like a human, and I'm not talking about how much she loves it. Her relationship with it plays out as if he were an actual family member, dynamics and all. They have fights, a lot. Mostly, she feels that he neglects her feelings and doesn't appreciate how much time she puts into being at work and doing all of the housework. She wishes he would at least help take the trash out. And when she was having frisky time with herself, she doesn't understand why he complains about having to go outside. Last night they had another fight, but I got home late, so I don't know what it was about. She spent an hour throwing things and eventually kicked him out for a while. It's weird. How do you kick out a cat? Wouldn't it just leave? I hear they have a tendency to do that. Story 9. My neighbor that lives below us likes to get gangbanged by groups of dudes twice her size, and she's not exactly petite. I was suspicious when a group of dudes showed up after her boyfriend moved out. Loud music was playing, so I figured it was just a party. And a group of dudes showed up at the same time. Then the music shuts off in the living room, but turns on in the bedroom. Proceed to hear dudes cheering each other on, her asking them to give her more dong, high fives, and other slappy sounds. It was awkward getting the mail the next day as she slowly walked her dog. She looked like she was hurtin'. Story 10. Last Christmas, I heard my neighbor beating her son violently. The little boy was screaming and begging his mom to stop. She just kept yelling that it was his father's fault for not paying child support. I called the cops who contacted CPS, and now I am public enemy number 1 in my apartment complex. Everyone hates me for going to the police. Really though, what are you supposed to do in that situation? I understand CPS kinda sucks and the foster housing system is bad. But also, what's the play? This making OP public enemy number 1, that's ridiculous in my opinion. Story 11. X and I heard neighbors going at it, younger couple around our age. Their bedroom is against our bedroom. Layouts are mirrored. We laughed really hard about it at first, and then it got really annoying. So we basically started making all the banging noises at the same time they did. After about a couple months of doing the noises to them, I ran into the neighbor getting mail, and we both cracked up hard. Came to find out that they had heard us banging first and started making noises, which we thought was them banging, so for the past few months, the 4 of us were literally laying in bed making banging noises at each other through the walls. Story 12. Just got my first solo apartment and I'm loving it. Most of the people are my age and really cool, but there is this needle-thin, probably 50 or 60 older woman that walks the halls day and night every single day. She waits for people to come out of their apartments and then sparks up very strange conversations. Looked out my window the other night at about 1 a.m. and she's wandering around the parking lot picking up cigarette butts and smoking them. Story 13. There were 2 women that lived above me, college-aged, same as me and my roommate. You could hear everything through the floor, and I mean everything. The woman above me banged a lot, and that's fine, but it was always loud and it was always at 4 or 5 a.m. or some crap. I had to work early a lot of days, so it was really frickin' irritating. So one night I stand on my bed and hit the ceiling with my shoe and ask them to quiet down. The noise stops, but the talking starts. Did you hear that? I think someone was talking to us. Nah, the dude downstairs is probably watching TV. Me, I am talking to you. The people on the 3rd floor, fricking loudly. Please be quiet. I gotta work in a couple hours. Guy number 2. He's definitely talking to us. No, he isn't. Wait, 2 guys? No, there's 3 of us. This plays out a little too much like a sitcom scene for me to fully believe it, but also, that's hilarious. Story 14. Been a few years, but the family living next to me had a daughter about 13 or 14 years old, and her mom walked in on her lying face down on the bathroom floor, trying to take a picture of either her butthole, kitty, or both, to send to some 30-something guy she met online. I know all of these details because mom shouted them at dad when he got home from work and berated daughter for hours. Mom also called the police to report the guy asking for pictures. I ate my supper cold because I didn't want the microwave to make noise in the kitchen because mom was on a roll and it was pretty crazy. Story 15. A few stories come to mind. Older couples in their 70s lived on the 2nd floor. They would cook me food, I would shovel their cars out in the winter, and here's the fun part, they had the loudest banging sessions several times a week. God bless their vigor. Made a new friend in one apartment by having the smell of dank weed seep into my apartment walls in a duplex. Currently living next to a rock star who unknowingly serenades me every so often when he's preparing for a gig. All in all, I've had a good run. Story 16. Found out my neighbor was a cam girl. Could hear everything from my bedroom. One weeknight she has a very loud and drunken stream. I went over and knocked on her door to ask her to quiet it down a little. No answer. I go back to my room and hear her crying, saying she thought someone was going to break in or something. Whatever, I called a noise complaint. Half an hour later, the cops show up and pound on her door for a good 15 minutes before she answers. They then proceed to chew her out for taking so long to answer and basically tell her to shut up before leaving. She goes back on stream and starts crying again, telling her viewers what happened before shutting down for the night. Found out my neighbor was a cam girl and made her cry live on stream twice in one night. OP, are you sure they're a cam girl? Because from what you described, nothing is specific to the adult industry. This could just be a poor Twitch streamer who got a little too hyped. Not defending the being too loud thing though, because that is just annoying. Story 17. So I used to live in this very hip loft-style apartment building. It attracted a lot of young people. The people in the apartment next to me were college students. The walls were so thin that if they were having a conversation on speakerphone in their living room, I could hear maybe 75% of it. It sucked, but once you got used to it, it wasn't a huge deal. One night, a friend and I come back rather late from a night at my local watering hole, and we can hear the guy next door getting lucky. We both giggle to ourselves, but whatever, good for him. I go into my room to crash and my buddy hits the couch. A few seconds later, we both hear as clear as day a girl's voice saying, "I won't lick your butthole, but I will give you head." My buddy and I both start laughing our butts off. Dude next door pounds a few times on the wall and yells, "Hey man, give me some space." Good times. Story 18. Apartment below me. He's about 30, borders on neckbeard, and wears one of these types of hats with a skull print zip hoodie from Walmart circa 2009. Probably works at a call center. Secret? He is having far more exceptional banging than anyone would expect. She's a 24-year-old nurse, pale brunette, and probably a 5. She visits for 3 days each week, and they usually go at it at least 4 times a day, often more. She wails at full volume, no filter, and they shake the entire building. You can literally feel every thrust, to the degree that I actually begin to feel motion sickness from it at this point. It's horrifically embarrassing when my family is over. Once my mom and dad, sheltered country people, visited, and were entirely convinced she was being assaulted. So while I was at work, they went to the sheriff's office in person and formally reported an assault. Story 19. Late to the game on this one, but here we go. My neighbor was a police officer. No idea what his wife did. Every night he started drinking when he got home. Usually turned into a screaming fight at 8. Sounded like plates and whatever being broken. Maybe actual fighting by 9:30. Asleep or passed out by 10 to 10:30. I used to joke to my wife that relationship was going to end in a homicide investigation. One night, after 2 hours of fighting, they're screaming at each other and bang, definite gunshot. My wife is out of the country, just me in my apartment. I grab my cell phone and dial 911. Then I can hear her crying, but I can't hear him. As I'm talking to 911, she runs out of the apartment and drives away. I'm trying to describe the car when the police show up. Turns out she just put a hole in the wall to scare him. He was drunk, but very much alive. She moved out the next day. He stayed for like 3 months. I'm guessing to finish the lease. I don't think anyone was ever charged with anything. Story 20. In college, I was always back at my apartment before lunch this one semester. This beautiful Targaryen/model type new alum lived next to us with her Brazilian soccer player student boyfriend. I can't overstate how made for TV this couple looked. At least for where I went to school. They would occasionally argue really badly at lunch. He would leave for class and she would proceed to loudly pleasure herself. This happened for weeks. I don't know if she instigated arguments because they turned her on or if that's how she dealt with the stress or what. One of my female roommates was friends with her, and from the stories, she seemed like an odd duck. Weird ideas about relationships, some eating problems in the past, just a weird neighbor. Story 21. Here's a fun story. Husband and I moved into a townhouse, old building from 1920, brick walls between units. We didn't hear a thing from the neighbors, like literally no sounds at all. We weren't even sure anyone was living next door until we met them because it was so quiet. So we figured the soundproofing was excellent. Husband and I were never quiet. We had no reason to be. We had 2 a.m. dance parties in our kitchen screaming to Outkast as loud as we possibly could. Then, the neighbors moved out and a new couple moved in. The second they showed up, we heard everything they did. Every single quiet conversation, every time someone closed a cabinet, every tiny sound we heard. It was not soundproof. The first couple was just incredibly quiet and we were huge, gigantic jerks. It's been years and I still feel bad. Story 22. He's an entrepreneur and an aspiring reality TV star. Seriously, what kind of person actually wants to be on a reality show? I know everything about him because he paces around and talks on the phone literally all day long. I work from home, so I hear him all day. Pretty much all he does is complain and talks in a loud, whiny voice and sounds like he's about to start crying like a little kid. He never stops talking, so I really want to know who he's talking to. Because there's never a break where another person could even respond, and who wants to hear this whiny crap all day? Maybe he's just talking into a tape recorder. It's always about the people who wronged him and about how hard he works. He gets all sassy. I said, "Oh no, I'm not going to give you a ride when I'm busy working so hard." I found him on Facebook and he lists his location as Manhattan. I do not live in Manhattan. I'm tempted to Facebook message him with a live transcription of what he's saying. Story 23. I only lived in an apartment for less than a year, but I learned that 1. The girl who lived below me and over one apartment, our bedroom windows were close, banged a lot when her husband was on the road. At least a lot more than when he was home. She was a screamer, and I would hear her in the middle of the night, as well as the banging of the headboard against the wall. 2. That the people who lived above me abused each other violently. 3. The guy who had the apartment next to mine was a drug dealer and gave girls a deal if they blew him. 4. The girl who lived in the next building traded for a lot of drugs from 3. 5. Never go into a public jacuzzi. My bedroom window looked down on the jacuzzi and I saw a lot of people banging in it. Story 24. I had to call the police on my neighbors in my old apartment. It was this crazy girl and her boyfriend. She lived with one roommate and was always super loud, and I could hear her playing Counter-Strike at 3 a.m. plenty of times, which I thought was hilarious and considered trying to find the same server, but I didn't really know how. But I played Dota until late and also music sometimes. Nothing too loud, but there was this one time where I had some friends over who were super loud, and she was pounding on the wall type thing, so I tried to be respectful after that. Anyway, this one night the guy in question comes over and they get into this crazy fight. The girl is basically battling the guy, pushing him around the room, and he's slamming into crap. I hear him yelling, "Take your hands off me, you're choking me!" And all this crap super loud. So I call the cops, but I tell them it really sounds like the guy is the victim here because I know how it can go. Before they get there, the guy leaves, but then he's forgotten his car keys. And we live in Brooklyn. Might have just taken a loss at that point and taken the train. And he goes back up to get them. She literally latched onto him and is hanging onto this guy's leg, not letting him leave. I was watching out my door peephole thing sketchily at this point. Finally, this dude is just stuck telling this girl to get off of him, and then the cops come. She lets go pretty quickly and the guy's able to go on his way. It ended up being pretty anticlimactic, but for a minute there, I thought someone was going to get seriously hurt. Story 25. We once had this next door neighbor who had done time for unaliving someone. I doubted it at first, but Google said it's true. His son dealt drugs, and one time their debtors came over. Sounded like they were coming through the walls with all the fighting. Another time, this same neighbor passed out on his couch with pea soup on the stove. The whole staircase smelled like burnt peas for a month. The firemen appreciated him not. Our upstairs neighbor is a cleaning addict who has multiple health issues, which she discusses very loudly over the phone. She also likes to reprimand her demented husband about everything and holds tea parties to badmouth her neighbors. Likes to count cigarette butts found in the yard. The new next-door neighbor broke her apartment in before she even had all her stuff in. I started wondering about this weird banging. After a while of that, she started making this really weird squealing sound. I've never heard the like, but I'm sure it was her, because it ended with a very high-pitched ooh. Didn't last that long though. I think her boyfriend deals weed and is not too good at it. Story 26. Not an apartment dweller anymore, but my old neighbor that was attached to my room. Our apartment had the living/kitchen/dining room in the middle and then a bedroom on either side. So our bedroom walls were shared with a bedroom from each neighbor. Really loved blasting Jesus music at 5 a.m. when she would wake up. She was a little old lady who would share dinner with us all the time though, since I think she was lonely. I had it infinitely better than my roommates, who had to listen to our other neighbors banging constantly. Story 27. When I was a freshman in high school, I heard banging sounds happen upstairs. Then 2 years later, I heard the constant wails of a baby. Really affected my studying and video game times. When I went off to college and came back home once in a while, I heard the constant laughing or crying of the kid upstairs. Sometimes I heard them get spankings for misbehaving. Now I hear the kid cussing, playing with a basketball at 11 p.m. to 12:30 a.m., and a bloody dog. Story 28. Freshman year dorms. A guy named Brian lived in my wing, and he was the quiet kinda geeky type. Super nice guy and very unassuming. Brian never had a single complaint thrown against him. Never had any issues with the RA. We invited him to drink with us a few times and he always politely refused. Well, one weekday night prior to finals, I'm trying to fall asleep, and suddenly I hear a chick moaning like crazy. At first, I think someone was crying next door or watching adult videos too loud. After listening for a bit, I realized that someone was banging her like a champ, and she was loving it. So I poke my head out into the hallway and a few other people are gathering in the hall. Some upset, some confused. I begin heading down to my friend's room because I assume he's the one doing the pounding. He was a popular, attractive dude. But as I walk past Brian's door, the sound intensified and then began to get quieter. It took a second to connect the dots before I realized that Brian was the one banging and making this girl scream like an adult video star. I turned to the others in the hall and pointed to his door as I tried to stifle my laughter of disbelief. Everyone had that holy crap look on their faces. We went and hung out in the common area, and about an hour later, Brian comes walking out with the girl, and she was really freaking cute. We all just glanced off awkwardly until he had said goodnight to her, and then the entire wing erupted into cheers and applause. Everyone made it their duty to high-five Brian. Dude was a legend for the rest of the year. So yeah, we learned that Nerdy Brian was like the Iron Chef of Pounding Kitty. As much as I hate the Reddit stories where everyone claps at the end because, come on. I really want to believe this one is true. Come on, Brian.